I'm not marrying you. You already did.
I will freeze in the streets before I stand at an altar with you, she hissed, her hands trembling in defiance. Adrian, the Duke of Ravenscroft, didn't flinch. He took a slow sip of his brandy, a devastating smile touching his lips. I'm not marrying you, Beatrix. You already did. The winter of 1888 did not arrive in Yorkshire. It invaded. It crept through the warped window frames of Blackwood Manor, frosting the glass and settling deep into the bones of Lady Beatrix Stanton. But the cold radiating from the hearth was nothing compared to the ice settling in her chest as she stared at the leather-bound ledgers stacked across her late father's mahogany desk. Lord Henry Stanton had been dead for exactly 1 week. The scent of funeral lilies still hung faintly in the drafty corridors, masking the distinct, sour odor of decay that seemed to emanate from the house itself. He had died of a failing heart, the physician had said. Beatrix knew better. He had died of terror. £140,000, Beatrix whispered, the numbers blurring as a single furious tear slipped down her cheek. She aggressively wiped it away, smudging the ink on her fingers. It is a staggering sum, my lady, muttered Mr. Josiah Gillingham, the family solicitor who stood nervously by the unlit fireplace. He was a small, gray man who looked as though he had been pressed between the pages of his own legal books. And that is only the principal owed to the bank. It does not account for the private promissory notes. Beatrix closed the ledger with a sharp snap that echoed in the cavernous, empty library. Most of the valuable paintings had already been sold quietly to cover the interest. The silver was gone. Even the carriage horses had been auctioned off 3 days prior. "Who holds the private notes, Mr. Gillingham?" Beatrix asked, her voice steady despite the nausea rolling in her stomach. "Who exactly owns my father's ruin?" The solicitor refused to meet her eyes. He focused intently on a thread unspooling from his waistcoat. "A single entity purchased the entirety of your father's private debts 6 months ago. Lady Beatrix, it is why the creditors stopped arriving at your door. They were bought out. By whom?" Before Gillingham could answer, the heavy double doors of the library swung open. The hinges, lacking oil, let out a mournful shriek. "By me." The voice was a low, resonant baritone that sent a violent shockwave down Beatrix's spine. She did not need to turn around to know who stood in the doorway. She had spent 3 years trying to forget the exact cadence of that voice, the way it used to murmur her name in the humid dark of a conservatory. Adrian Pendleton. The Duke of Ravenscroft. Beatrix turned slowly, bracing herself against the edge of the desk. Adrian stepped into the dim light of the library, filling the room with an oppressive, undeniable gravity. He wore a tailored black morning coat that emphasized the broad, ruthless line of his shoulders. His dark hair was meticulously swept back, framing a face that society papers often described as angelically brutal. His jaw was clenched, his eyes a striking, stormy gray locked onto hers with an intensity that made the air in the room feel perilously thin. "Your Grace," Gillingham stammered, bowing so deeply he nearly folded in half. "I did not expect you until the morrow." I found myself impatient, Gillingham. "You may leave us," Adrian said, never breaking eye contact with Beatrix. Gillingham didn't need to be told twice. He gathered his briefcase with trembling hands and scurried out, pulling the heavy doors shut behind him. The click of the latch sounded like a prison cell locking into place. Silence stretched between them, heavy and suffocating. Beatrix lifted her chin, refusing to let him see the absolute terror gripping her heart. 3 years ago, Adrian had been a second son, a cavalry officer with no fortune and a dangerous smile, whom she had loved with a blinding, foolish passion. Now, through a series of tragic accidents that claimed his older brother and father, he was a duke, and, apparently, her executioner. "You have come to gloat, then?" Beatrix asked, her voice dripping with a poison she didn't know she possessed. Adrian slowly unbuttoned his overcoat, draping it over a nearby armchair. I have come to collect, Beatrix. There is a distinct difference. You cannot have Blackwood. It is entailed. It passes to my cousin, Percival. Percival Stanton is a coward who sold his claim to the entailment to me 2 days ago for a mere £10,000 and a ticket to America, Adrian stated matter-of-factly, stepping closer. The faint, intoxicating scent of bergamot and rain washed over her, a ghost from a past she had desperately tried to bury. The estate is mine. The land is mine. The very chair you are leaning against, Beatrix, belongs to me. Beatrix's breath hitched. Betrayed by her father, abandoned by her cousin, she was entirely untethered, a ship cast adrift in a hurricane. Why? She demanded, her voice finally breaking. Is this your revenge, Adrian? Because I would not run away with a penniless soldier? Because I chose my family over you? A muscle jumped in Adrian's jaw. The stoic mask slipped for a fraction of a second, revealing a chasm of raw, unhealed agony beneath. You didn't just choose your family, Beatrix. You left me waiting in the rain at the crossroads, and the next morning, I received a letter in your hand telling me I was nothing but a summer diversion. A mistake. I never wrote that, Beatrix shouted, stepping out from behind the desk. My father confined me to my quarters. He threatened to have you court-martialed and ruined if I tried to see you. I wrote to you begging for a week to change his mind, but you never replied. Adrian stopped, just inches from her. The physical proximity was agonizing. He looked down at her, his expression unreadable. It matters very little now who wrote what, or what lies Henry Stanton spun to keep his prize mare on the market for a higher bidder. He is dead. And he died, owing me a fortune. I have nothing to give you, Beatrix whispered, staring at his immaculate cravat, unable to look into his eyes. I am ruined. Take the house. Take it all. I will pack my trunks tonight and go to my aunt in London. Adrian reached out, his gloved fingers lightly catching her chin, forcing her to look up at him. The touch burned her skin. Your aunt in London relies on an allowance from this estate, Beatrix. An allowance I have already severed. You have nowhere to go. No money, no family. You are completely, utterly, at my mercy. Then do your worst, your grace, she spat, jerking her face away from his touch. Adrian's eyes darkened, a storm brewing in the gray depths. Oh, my sweet Beatrix, I haven't even begun. The journey to London was a blur of freezing rain and rattling carriage wheels. Adrian had not evicted her from Blackwood, but rather commanded her to follow him to the city. He had sent his own private carriage for her, a luxurious beast of velvet and mahogany, but sitting within it felt like riding in a hearse. Her loyal maid, Clara, sat opposite her, knitting nervously. He cannot simply throw you out into the snow, my lady. The Duke of Ravenscroft may be known as a hard man in Parliament, but he is a gentleman. He is a creditor, Clara, Beatrix replied, staring blankly out the window at the passing grey moors. And I am a debt. Upon arriving in London, Beatrix was not taken to a modest boarding house or her aunt's crumbling townhouse. The carriage pulled through the wrought iron gates of the Ravenscroft estate in Mayfair. It was a sprawling, intimidating fortress of pale stone and wealth. She was ushered inside by a silent army of servants and led to a suite of rooms that were more opulent than the entirety of Blackwood Manor. Silk damask covered the walls, and a roaring fire was already waiting for her. But Beatrix felt only the cold steel of a trap, snapping shut. She did not wait to be summoned. After splashing cold water on her face and changing into her only respectable morning gown, she marched out of her gilded cage and demanded the head butler take her to the Duke. She was led to a massive study lined with thousands of books. Adrian was seated behind a desk that looked like it had been carved from a single piece of ebony, reviewing a stack of documents. He looked up as she entered, dismissing the butler with a flick of his wrist. "You are settled in, I trust?" Adrian asked casually, leaning back in his chair. "I am not a guest here, Adrian, so let us dispense with the pleasantries," Beatrix said, marching to the center of the Persian rug. "I know how this game is played. I have read the society papers. I know what men of your standing do with women in my position." Adrian's eyebrow arched slowly. "Enlighten me." "You hold my father's debts. You own my home. You have ensured I have no family to turn to." Beatrix felt her chest heaving, the sheer humiliation of the moment threatening to choke her. "You want me as your mistress. You want to parade the proud Lady Beatrix, who supposedly spurned you, as your kept woman. A trophy of your revenge." Adrian stared at her for a long, agonizing moment. Then, he let out a low, humorless laugh that sounded like scraping metal. "A mistress? Do you think so little of my ambition, Beatrix?" He stood up, walking slowly around the desk. "If I wanted a mistress, London is entirely populated with willing aristocrats. I do not deal in temporary arrangements. I deal in permanent acquisitions." Beatrix backed away as he approached, her heart hammering against her ribs. "I will freeze in the streets before I stand at an altar with you," she hissed, hands trembling. Adrian didn't flinch. He walked over to a crystal decanter, pouring a small measure of brandy. He took a slow sip, a devastating, hollow smile touching his lips. "I'm not marrying you, Beatrix. You already did." The words hung in the air, nonsensical and absurd. Beatrix stopped moving. "What are you talking about? Are you mad?" Adrian set the glass down and walked back to his desk. He opened a small, locked iron box and extracted a piece of aged, yellowed parchment. He walked back to her and held it out. "Do you remember the winter of 1885? Adrian asked, his voice suddenly dropping its cruel edge, replaced by a haunting quiet. "When we finally managed to slip away? When we took your father's carriage and rode north for the border?" Beatrix's breath seized. How could she forget? It was the most desperate, terrifying, and beautiful 3 days of her life. They had made it just past the Scottish border to a village called Gretna Green before a massive blizzard had trapped them. They had sought refuge at a small inn. "We never made it to the anvil," Beatrix whispered, staring at the paper in his hand. "My father's men caught up to us the next morning. They dragged me back. You fought them, and they beat you nearly to death." "True," Adrian said, stepping closer. "But we spent the night in that inn. Do you remember what the innkeeper required before he would let a young, unchaperoned couple share his only remaining room?" Beatrix's mind spun backwards. The cold, the desperation, the innkeeper, a gruff Scottish man with a thick beard, pushing a heavy ledger toward them by the light of a single candle. "Sign the book as husband and wife, or ye sleep in the barn." "I'll have no sin under my roof," the man had said. "It was just an inn registry," Beatrix gasped, her eyes wide with sudden horrifying realization. A lie to get out of the freezing cold. "I signed it, Beatrix Pendleton." "Under Scottish law," Adrian said softly, his gray eyes piercing hers. "A declaration of marriage, made in front of witnesses, even an innkeeper and his wife, is legally binding. It is known as marriage by declaration." "No." Beatrix stepped back, shaking her head violently. "No, my father had that annulled. He told me he took care of it. He paid the innkeeper to burn the page." "Your father," Adrian sneered. The name, tasting like ash in his mouth, was a remarkably talented extortionist. "He didn't burn the page, Beatrix. He cut it out of the ledger and brought it back to London. He held on to it." Adrian thrust the paper into her trembling hands. Beatrix looked down. There, in faded ink, were their signatures. Underneath were the signatures of the innkeeper and his wife, serving as witnesses. And at the bottom, a recent stamp from the Crown's magistrate, authenticating the document. "When your father's debts finally suffocated him 6 months ago, he came to me," Adrian explained, his voice tight with suppressed rage. He knew I had come into my title. He knew I had wealth. He offered me a trade. He would legally validate our Scottish marriage, registering it with the Church of England and the courts, if I quietly bought up all of his ruinous debts and saved him from dying in debtor's prison. Beatrix stared at the paper, the room spinning violently around her. She was a piece of property, a marker traded between two men who hated each other. Her father had sold her to cover his gambling debts, using a desperate, romantic mistake from her youth as the currency. "You bought me," she whispered, looking up at him, tears finally spilling over her lashes. "I am your wife." "Before God and the crown," Adrian murmured, reaching out. His thumb brushed the tear from her cheek, his touch impossibly gentle compared to the cruelty of his trap. "For 3 years, Beatrix, for 3 years, you have been the Duchess of Ravenscroft. Welcome home." The announcement appeared in the London Gazette 3 days later, a modest, elegantly typeset paragraph nestled between the naval promotions and the sovereign's appointments. It stated with infuriating simplicity that Adrian Pendleton, His Grace, the Duke of Ravenscroft, had formalized his long-standing private Scottish union with Lady Beatrix Stanton. The high society of 1888 reacted with the predictable ferocity of starved wolves sensing fresh blood. Within hours, the heavy brass knocker of the Ravenscroft townhouse on Grosvenor Square did not cease its rhythmic pounding. Calling cards from the Duchess of Marlborough, the Earl of Derby, and even a polite note on royal stationery from Albert Edward, the Prince of Wales, piled high on the silver salver in the foyer. They all wished to see the woman who had managed to trap the most notoriously elusive, stone-hearted peer in the House of Lords. Beatrix remained locked in her chambers, a prisoner of silk and velvet. Adrian had provided her with a wardrobe that rivaled royalty gowns of crushed sapphire velvet, pearl-encrusted bodices, and day dresses of the finest Parisian silk. Yet, to Beatrix, they felt like the ornate wrappings of a corpse. They did not share a bed. Adrian had given her the master suite, retiring himself to the adjoining rooms connected by a heavy oak door that remained bolted from her side. He was a phantom in her daily life, departing for Parliament before she woke and returning long after she had dismissed her maid, Clara, for the night. The only evidence of his existence was the lingering scent of his cheroot smoke in the hallways, and the terrifying reality of the wedding band he had forced onto her finger, a heavy, ancient diamond flanked by blood rubies. Their Cold War broke on the evening of the Duke of Westminster's spring ball. Adrian summoned her to the drawing room. He stood by the fireplace, dressed in impeccable evening clothes, a stark contrast to the haunted, bruised cavalry officer she had once loved. He looked at her as she entered, her gown a sweeping cascade of midnight blue silk, and for a fraction of a second, the icy veneer cracked. A flash of raw, consuming hunger darkened his gray eyes before he brutally suppressed it. "You look adequately presentable," he murmured, his voice completely devoid of the emotion his eyes had just betrayed. "I am dressed for my execution, Your Grace," Beatrix replied coldly, lifting her chin. "I assume tonight is the night you parade your newly acquired property before the Tun." Adrian stepped forward, pulling a flat velvet box from his breast pocket. He snapped it open to reveal a necklace of staggering, obscene wealth, a cascade of diamonds that caught the firelight like frozen tears. "Turn around," he commanded softly. Beatrix complied, her spine stiff. She felt the cool metal of the necklace settle against her collarbone, followed by the agonizingly warm brush of Adrian's gloved fingers against the nape of her neck as he fastened the clasp. A shiver wrecked through her, betraying her stoicism. "Smile tonight, Beatrix," he whispered, his breath ghosting over her ear, sending a treacherous thrill down her spine. "They will be looking for cracks. Do not give them the satisfaction." The ballroom at Grosvenor House was a suffocating sea of waltzing aristocrats, blinding chandeliers, and whispered gossip. As Adrian led her down the grand staircase, the music practically ground to a halt. Every eye turned to them. Adrian's hand rested firmly on the small of her back, an iron grip disguised as a lover's touch. He played the part of the devoted husband with sickening perfection. He fetched her champagne, danced with her flawlessly, and deflected the barbed questions of society matrons with razor-sharp wit. But Beatrix felt entirely alone, suffocating under the weight of the diamonds and the lies. It was during a brief moment when Adrian was cornered by the Chancellor of the Exchequer that the true horror of her situation was revealed. Beatrix had retreated to the shadows of a potted fern when a voice slithered over her shoulder. "Lady Beatrix, or should I say, Your Grace." She turned to find Lord Reginald Croft, a man whose reputation in London was as dark and foul as the Thames. He was wealthy, cruel, and known for a string of mistresses who often ended up quietly institutionalized or missing. "Lord Croft," she said, her voice dropping to a frosty register. Croft smiled, his eyes raking over her diamonds with greedy familiarity. "I must confess, I was terribly disappointed when your father's estate was settled so suddenly. Lord Henry and I had come to a rather intimate arrangement regarding your future." Beatrix's blood ran cold. "I do not know what you mean." "Oh, come now. You knew your father was drowning in debt," Croft purred, leaning in so close she could smell the sour gin on his breath. "Before the great Duke of Ravenscroft swooped in, your father had signed a promissory note, turning you over to me. I was to forgive £40,000 of his gambling debts in exchange for your hand. You were to be shipped off to my estate in Cornwall, permanently." Beatrix stepped back, the ballroom spinning. Her father had sold her to a monster? "But then," Croft sneered, glaring across the room at Adrian. Ravenscroft intervened. "He didn't just buy your father's debts, you know. He paid me double the value of my promissory note to tear it up. He bled his own family coffers dry to outbid every creditor in London, just to ensure he was the sole owner of your ruin. One has to wonder, Beatrix, what kind of vengeance is worth £140,000? Croft bowed mockingly and slipped back into the crowd, leaving Beatrix gripping the edge of a marble pillar to keep from collapsing. She looked across the room. Adrian was watching her through the crowd, his expression completely unreadable. The narrative she had clung to that Adrian was her tormentor, a man executing a cruel revenge, suddenly fractured. He had not just trapped her, he had shielded her from the abyss. The carriage ride back to the Ravenscroft townhouse was swallowed in total silence. Rain lashed against the windows, blurring the gas lamps of London into streaks of yellow fire. Beatrix sat shivering, not from the cold, but from the violent paradigm shift fracturing her reality. Adrian poured himself a glass of whiskey as soon as they entered his private study, tossing his top hat onto a leather sofa. He looked exhausted, the lines of his face drawn tight. "You were speaking with Croft," Adrian said suddenly, his back to her. "It wasn't a question. It was an accusation. I forbade you from interacting with him." "You do not command who speaks to me in a crowded ballroom," Beatrix snapped, though the fire in her voice was entirely gone. She walked slowly toward the center of the room, her heavy silk skirts rustling against the Persian rug. "He told me about the promissory note, Adrian. He told me about my father's plan to give me to him." Adrian's shoulders went rigid. He slowly set the crystal glass on the desk. "Croft is a parasite who likes to hear himself speak. Go to bed, Beatrix." "Did you buy it?" she demanded, stepping closer, desperate to see his face. "Did you pay him double to tear up the contract? Did you know what my father was going to do to me?" Adrian turned, his eyes blazing with a sudden, uncontrollable fury. "Yes! I knew!" he roared, the sheer volume of his voice making the window panes rattle. "Your father came to me weeping, begging for funds, admitting he had already sold his only daughter to a sadist to cover his baccarat losses. I knew exactly what awaited you in Cornwall." Beatrix flinched, the truth hitting her with the force of a physical blow. "So, you bought me instead? To save me? Or to punish me yourself?" Do not flatter yourself with romantic notions of rescue. Adrian snarled, pacing away from her, rubbing his temples. I bought the debt because I could not stomach the insult to my pride. The woman who found me unworthy of her love, sold to the highest bidder like a common mare. It was pathetic. I never found you unworthy, Beatrix cried out, the years of repressed agony finally breaking through. I loved you. I begged my father on my knees to let me marry you. I waited for you to reply to my letters. Adrian stopped dead. He turned to her, his face a mask of absolute, chilling disbelief. Your letters? You wrote me exactly one letter after Gretna Green, Beatrix, and the ink was barely dry when your father's footman delivered it to my hospital bed. He crossed the room in 3 massive strides, unlocked the iron safe behind his desk, and ripped out a bundle of papers. He threw them onto the mahogany desk. Read it, he commanded, his voice trembling with a rage he had carried for 3 years. Read the words you wrote while I was coughing up blood from the beating your father's men gave me. Beatrix approached the desk with shaking hands. She picked up the top parchment. It was undeniably her handwriting, the elegant, sweeping loops of her script. Adrian, the folly of our Scottish escape has opened my eyes. I was swept up in a childish romance, but the reality of a life with a penniless second son is a burden I refuse to bear. Do not contact me again. I belong to society, and you belong nowhere. Beatrix. She stared at the paper, the breath completely leaving her lungs. Adrian, I did not write this. This isn't just a lie, it's impossible. It is your hand, he sneered, though the absolute panic in her eyes was making his own conviction waver. It is my hand, but I did not write these words. Beatrix frantically dropped the letter and dug through the rest of the bundle. She pulled out a stack of smaller, crinkled envelopes. What are these? Adrian's jaw tightened. Correspondence between your father and my late brother, Richard. I found them when I inherited the title and the estate. Beatrix ripped open the top letter. It was dated a week after their failed elopement in Scotland. It was in the heavy, aggressive script of Richard Pendleton, the former Duke of Ravenscroft. Lord Stanton, it seems your daughter and my idiot brother nearly caused a scandal that would have ruined us both. Adrian is currently bedridden. I have intercepted the pathetic, weeping letters your daughter has been sending him. They are in the fire. Enclosed is the blank stationery you provided with Lady Beatrix's signature at the bottom. I have had my secretary forge the rest, perfectly mimicking her hand. Once I deliver this rejection to Adrian, his spirit will be broken entirely, and he will agree to the commission in India. Ensure your daughter is kept locked away until he sails. Ravenscroft. The letter slipped from Beatrix's hands, fluttering to the floor like a dead leaf. The silence in the room was absolute, deafening, and horrific. Adrian stared at the letter on the floor. His chest began to heave, his breathing turning ragged and uneven. 3 years. 3 years of profound, soul-destroying hatred. 3 years of building a fortress of wealth and power just to crush the woman he believed had discarded him like trash. And it was all a lie, forged by a brother he had mourned and a father she had just buried. Adrian, Beatrix whispered, her voice breaking. Tears streamed down her face, ruining her powder, splashing onto the diamond necklace he had clasped around her throat. Adrian looked up at her. The brutal, untouchable Duke of Ravenscroft was gone. In his place was the shattered, heartbroken boy from the rain-soaked crossroads, bleeding from wounds that had never actually healed. They forged it, Adrian choked out, his voice utterly destroyed. He fell to his knees on the Persian rug, the strength completely leaving his legs. He stared at the scattered papers as if they were venomous snakes. Richard, my own brother. He watched me grieve you. He watched me want to die. Beatrix didn't hesitate. She dropped to her knees in front of him, the heavy blue silk of her gown pooling around them. She reached out, her trembling hands framing his face, forcing him to look at her. I wrote to you every day, she sobbed, her thumbs brushing the tears that were finally escaping his gray eyes. "I told you I loved you. I told you I would wait until the end of the world for you." Adrian let out a ragged, agonizing breath and pulled her into him. He buried his face in her neck, his large hands gripping the fabric of her gown as if she might vanish into the London fog. He held her with a desperate, crushing intensity, the years of coldness melting away in the heat of a shared, devastating grief. "I bought your debts because I couldn't let anyone else have you," he confessed against her skin, his voice breaking. "Even when I hated you, Beatrix, I never stopped loving you. Not for a single second." The fire in the grate had burned down to glowing red embers by the time they finally rose from the Persian rug. The dawn of a new, fragile morning was bleeding through the velvet curtains of Grosvenor Square, casting the study in a soft, pearlescent light. Adrian stood by the hearth, his evening jacket discarded, his waistcoat unbuttoned. He held the bundle of forged letters in his hands. He did not read them again. The poison of his brothers and Lord Henry's words had lost its power the moment Beatrix's tears had soaked through his shirt. Without a word, he tossed the entire stack into the embers. The dry, aged paper caught instantly, flaring into a brilliant, brief inferno before curling into blackened ash. "They stole 3 years from us," Beatrix whispered, standing beside him. She reached out, her fingers lacing through his. The heavy, ruby-flanked diamond on her left hand caught the firelight. It no longer felt like a shackle, it felt like a shield. Adrian pulled her hand to his lips, pressing a fierce, lingering kiss to her knuckles. "They will not steal another second. Richard is in his crypt, and your father is in his. They cannot hurt you anymore, Beatrix, and I swear to you before God, I will spend the rest of my life making penance for believing their lies." "There is no penance to be paid," she murmured, resting her head against the solid, warm wall of his chest. "You walked into the fire to pull me out, Adrian. You bought my ruin, so the monsters of this world could not have me. You were my guardian, even when you thought you despised me." Adrian closed his eyes, burying his face in the soft silk of her hair. "I never despised you. I despised myself for not being able to breathe without you." Later that morning, after they had finally slept tangled together in the sprawling mahogany bed of the master suite, the locked adjoining door left wide open. Adrian summoned Mr. Gillingham, the terrified little solicitor, back to the townhouse. Beatrix sat in a leather wingback chair, wearing a simple day dress of ivory muslin, while Adrian stood behind his desk. "Your Grace," Gillingham stammered, clutching his briefcase. "How may I be of service?" Adrian did not speak. He simply pushed a heavy, ribbon-bound stack of legal documents across the ebony wood. "These are the deeds, titles, and entailment papers for Blackwood Manor, as well as the entirety of the Stanton Estate's consolidated debts, which I currently hold." "Yes, Your Grace. The paperwork is perfectly in order." "Good," Adrian said, his voice ringing with absolute authority. "Transfer them." Gillingham blinked, adjusting his spectacles. "Transfer them. Your Grace? To whom?" "To my wife, the Duchess of Ravenscroft." Adrian stepped around the desk, his eyes locked on Beatrix. "Blackwood Manor will be placed entirely in her name, unburdened by any debt. The promissory notes are to be marked paid in full and legally dissolved. She is to have complete and total autonomy over her ancestral home and its revenues." Beatrix's breath hitched. "Adrian? No. The debt is astronomical. You cannot simply erase it." "I am the Duke of Ravenscroft," Adrian said softly, kneeling before her chair, uncaring of the solicitor standing just feet away. He took her hands in his. "My wealth is vast, Beatrix, but it is entirely useless to me if you do not feel safe. I will not have you stay in this marriage because you are bound by a Scottish ledger or a financial chain. I give you back your home. I give you back your freedom. If you stay with me now, it must be because you choose to." Tears, hot and fast, blurred her vision. She looked at the man she had loved since she was a girl, the battered soldier, the ruthless duke, the broken heart, and finally, the devoted husband. "I chose you at the crossroads in the rain, Adrian," she whispered, leaning forward to press her forehead against his. "I chose you in the freezing cold of that Scottish inn. And I choose you now. There is nowhere else I belong." Their return to society occurred 2 weeks later at the royal enclosure at Ascot. The sky was a brilliant, cloudless blue, and the elite of Britain were adorned in their finest silks and top hats. When the Duke and Duchess of Ravenscroft stepped out of their carriage, the whispering began almost immediately. The Tun had expected to see a broken, conquered woman trailing behind a triumphant, vengeful lord. Instead, they saw royalty. Beatrix walked with her head held high, radiating a breathtaking, untouchable confidence. She wore a gown of emerald green that perfectly matched the sheer vitality in her eyes. Adrian walked beside her, not gripping her with the iron control of a captor, but offering his arm with the reverent devotion of a man guarding his most precious treasure. When he looked at her, the legendary ice in his gray eyes was completely melted, replaced by a consuming, blatant adoration that left the society matrons speechless. As they made their way toward the royal pavilion, they crossed paths with Lord Reginald Croft. The slimy baron stopped, a sickening, calculating smirk forming on his face as he prepared to deliver a veiled insult regarding her father's debts. Before Croft could even open his mouth, Adrian stopped. He did not raise his voice. He did not draw a weapon. He merely looked at Croft with a gaze so dark, so completely devoid of mercy, that the surrounding crowd physically took a step back. "Lord Croft," Adrian said, his voice a low, lethal rumble that carried perfectly over the polite chatter. "I am told the climate in Cornwall is particularly unforgiving this time of year. Perhaps you should retreat to your estate, permanently, before I find a reason to look into the discrepancies of your maritime shipping accounts." Croft's face drained of all color. He opened his mouth, closed it, bowed stiffly, and scurried away like a rat fleeing a sinking ship. Beatrix let out a soft, delighted laugh, leaning closer to her husband. "That was incredibly wicked, Your Grace." "I am a wicked man, Beatrix," Adrian murmured, a devastating, genuine smile finally breaking across his handsome face. He pulled her flush against his side, unbothered by the stares of the Prime Minister, Robert Gascoigne Cecil, Lord Salisbury, who was watching them with an amused glint in his eye. "But I am entirely, irrevocably yours." The music of the brass band swelled over the manicured lawns, but Beatrix heard only the steady, comforting rhythm of Adrian's heart. The storms of winter had passed, the debts of the past had burned to ash, and the Duke, who had promised never to marry her, had given her the world instead. If you were captivated by Adrian and Beatrix's heart-wrenching journey from betrayal to triumph, please like this video, subscribe to our channel, and share this story with your fellow romance lovers. Hit the notification bell so you never miss another dramatic historical tale. What would you have done in Beatrix's shoes? Let us know in the comments below.
Hi, my name is Dominant Flame Escrow, the owner and manager of Dominant Flame Escrow. After watching the video, Boy with Bruised Face asked bikers, "Can I work here? What happened next shook the whole town." I'd really like to know what you think. How did this story make you feel? What stayed with me most was the feeling of vulnerability behind such a simple question. A kid showing up bruised and asking for work instead of help says a lot about what he may have already been through. That's what gave the story its emotional weight for me. Sometimes people who seem tough on the outside can still recognize pain immediately, especially when they see it in someone younger and defenseless. Do you think the bikers saw part of themselves in that boy, or was it simply impossible for them to ignore what was happening to him? And why do you think kindness from unexpected people often leaves the strongest impression? I think stories like this remind us that support and protection can come from places we least expect, and that paying attention to someone struggling can truly matter. If this story stayed with you emotionally, I'd really love to hear your thoughts in the comments. And if you enjoy biker stories filled with loyalty, heart, and unexpected human connection, feel free to like and subscribe, only if you'd like to see more.